when I was about 5, my mother had this beautiful solid gold watch, and it was like a lame, fascinating thing. It was just beautiful and fascinating thing, and I always loved it. Well, and I discovered that my sister was born before me, and then I was born. And then 2 years later, or a year later, my brother, Mark, was born, and my mother got a solid gold watch.
Your mother got the jackpot.
My son is born.
My son has come. Finally,
my son. My dad felt that way anyway.
Kind of a retirement watch.
I always wondered what happened to that watch. And I mean, I can just, like, little snapshots, right? That's one. I grew up in Pleasantville, New York, and walked to school about 1.5 miles. And as I was walking to school, I would see these green buses, probably 15 of them every morning. While I was walking to school, they were going the other way, and they were taking women to Reader's Digest to be key punch operators. And busloads and busloads and busloads of women going to Reader's Digest, and I just had this image in my mind of these women just sitting there going like this all day long. And I knew I was never going to be a secretary. I just knew it. But in terms of, so those are the feelings that are at that sort of grew as I am a woman, and I'm not going to do those things. And then I went through the same 60s that Kathleen and Bonnie did, in terms of being involved in political movements and seeing the women being suggested to make the coffee.
And to make the bed.
And the bed. Although I had a little bit of a different experience, because I went to work for the National Student Association in their drug studies and educational reform program through a complete and total fluke, and ended up using sex and drugs and rock and roll as organizing tools on college campuses around the northeastern United States. So I got my feminist activism, only they didn't call it feminism back there, and they barely called it women's liberation. And then I was in California and went to Antioch West, and I took a women in literature course from this incredible Latin woman, Marta, who just opened my eyes to Virginia Woolf, to Doris Lessing, and those books sent me on my path of recognizing that other women not only thought about the things that had happened in my life or that I thought about, but that they were writing books about it that were fascinating and engaging. And when I came to the Kootenays, in 1972, when I came here to live in 72, there was a food co-op meeting at the little schoolhouse in Valakan for the Slocan Valley, and about 100 people showed up. And they were all there doing, food buying co-op stuff, and sort of towards the end of the meeting, it looked like it was going to be breaking up, and I had been watching for about 3 months the relations between men and women and how they were, the roles and the rigidity and and I, again, knew that wasn't how I wanted to live. So I stood up in this meeting with 100 people and I said, I'm interested in talking about, talking with other women about the roles of men and women and how they relate to each other in the valley.
Go over big?
And there was quite a bit of silence, and I said, well, and if anybody wants to talk about that, they can come up and talk to me after the meeting. 17 women came up to talk to me after the meeting.
That's great.
37 women came to the first meeting. Consciousness-raising meetings in the Slocan Valley that went on for quite a long time.
When was that?
That started in '72.
Oh.
And yeah, and went on, and out of it grew the Theater Energy and the Women's Readers Theater, and you can read about some of those things on KootenaiFeminism.com if any of you haven't taken a look at the wonderful webpage, KootenaiFeminism.com. It's all about the history of the development of feminism in the West Kootenays, all over the West Kootenays. So I encourage you to do that.
Well, I pulled the whole role thing, and I think when the time it occurred to me that something was seriously wrong was when I had my second child by cesarean section, and I decided if this child was born and it was without Downs, because I was an elderly mother then at 33, I wanted to have my tubes tied. And they had to get my husband's permission.
Oh my goodness.
Well, it didn't really make me gobsmacked at the time. I had bought the whole thing, and then I read Germaine Greer, the female eunuch.
What is it? Who is it? Germaine?
Germaine Greer. And then I became absolutely horrible. I was known as the family women's libber. And people couldn't say anything with the slightest. And I would bump. And my mother, one example was my mother wrote, they tell me one of my male cousins was engaged to this sweet little thing. And I wrote back and said, is she a woman or a chocolate chip cookie? So, anyway, I've calmed down a bit.
What years was this?
This was in the early 70s.
The times.
Those were the days, my friend. We hope they never end.
That's funny.
Well, my background lies largely in my reading. I was greatly influenced by Germaine Greer. And the first MS magazine, I was one of the first subscribers to it. And I haven't been particularly active in my advocacy ever since. And I don't have any dramatic highlight moments. It's just been a growing thing. And it's great to be here and hear your various stories.
Well, feminism, I was a women's liberationist. I'd still like to be a women's liberationist. At the time, in the 70s, there were all the liberation struggles all over the world, and that's why women's liberation fit in then. I don't know when it turned to feminism, but that's okay. So I was living in the States and moved to Canada and found out that there was a women's center in Montreal. I moved to Montreal. And that's where I solidified my political education and my women's liberation understanding through consciousness-raising groups and through contact with so many other women, and that was 1968 when I moved here. But in San Francisco, I was living in an apartment with other women, and we formed the Liz Estrada League.
The what? Sorry?
Liz Estrada League. Liz Estrada was a play, a Greek play,
Okay.
where the men kept going and fighting. I think it was Sparta and yeah. So and the women went on a sex strike. They organized and they said, no play until you stop fighting. And it's a wonderful play. Anyway, so we formed the Liz Estrada League for the same reason, that to say that it was sex, drugs, and rock and roll going on, and I wrote a story later on about who got screwed by the sexual revolution. Of course, it was us. But, yeah, and I've been a feminist since 1968.
Took a bit, eh?
But when I was 15, I was raped. Well, I wasn't raped. I was almost raped. I was attacked. As I was walking home, feeling my independent power, walking home at night, somebody, you know, it never happened. Somebody jumped out of the bushes, and I've been recovering ever since. That sense of, and when I hear what's happening to women around the world, and I realized how hard it was for me to even recover, year after year, actively fighting the fear. And I used to, we were in images, so we're all walking wounded. But I don't know how they recover. I don't know how anybody recovers from the attack on yourself, on your safety, on your life, on yourself as a person when something like that happens. And it would be worse, I think, if it was somebody. I don't know if it would be worse if it was somebody I knew. You know, but so that started me, I think. I mean, I was open to feminism, and as soon as I found it, I embraced it and been one ever since. And I'm very glad I
I think mine was a long, I can't pinpoint any exact moment, but growing up, I related a lot to with Kathleen. I was a tomboy, and I had a very strong, both grandmothers were women that didn't have husbands around. So they, one grandmother brought 4 kids from Ottawa out west to go on a farm. I mean, she had an uncle that was helping her, but she came. So I had grandmothers that were very strong, and my mother basically raised the 4 kids. My dad was in the army when I was born, and she was gone for 5 till I was 5 almost. So I had a very strong women's upbringing up until that point. And then my mom died, and I went and lived with my aunt and uncle, and there was a very different feeling there. My aunt was very strong, and yet I felt there's something wrong here. Because I felt like she was a strong woman, but there was a but there, that somehow the power was not, she didn't have the power. I didn't in those days say power, but I just felt there was something wrong. And I grew up in that, and then I went into nursing, and in that situation I saw a lot of abuse. Verbal mainly, from men, from doctors, to nurses and even patients. And so I was in Vancouver, and I was involved with the gay community at that time, and then I started meeting women that were considering themselves feminist, and I got involved with the status of women, and they were having in the early 70s, they were having consciousness raising and that, and I got involved with that, and that's when I think I really started to consider myself a feminist. But I can always remember as a kid thinking, there's something wrong. You know, there's something wrong with going on, and I could never put it to words, and I mean, now I can.
Yeah, like everybody else, kind of a process. I think I just start when it actually became really real. For a long time, for a lot of years, when I was a teenager and in my 20s, I wished I was a man. I always thought they had it made. And I guess it was 1974 we moved over to the island. And whenever I moved or wherever I was always looking for something in the community to become involved in. And I met this one woman who became a very good friend, who was already involved in the women's movement. And they were planning a conference. And so I went to one of the organizing meetings, and I got the idea of that I wanted for us to somehow to reach the young mums at home, because women's liberation then was all this fire and brimstone and burning bras, and I mean, I had been at home and then a little housewife at one point too, as well as having spent a lot of years single parenting and working. But I wanted them to not be afraid, so I wrote up some columns and went to the newspaper and asked if they would print them, and which they did. And we turned out we had a lot of people came, a lot of women came to the conference, and we had, you know, various workshops. So that was for me the beginning of it, and then there were women started a women's center, and then there were consciousness raising groups, and which I was involved in one for quite a long time. And it was great because there was women of all different ages, and we really got to know. There was one woman who was like, I was at that point in my 30s, mid-30s, and there was one woman who was in her 60s, and after, she hardly ever said anything in the group, but she was in an oppressive marriage, which everybody knew, but one day she came to group and she says, I left him. She used to go to sleep half the time in the group and never thought she was doing anything. But it changed a lot of us. And then we got involved politically as well, helping to organize the, I think it was the Bank of Nova Scotia, towards unionizing. And then I took the rape, it was called Rape Assault Center at that point when I moved to Victoria, and was active in that for quite a while, and power structure study groups, and yeah, just a lot of stuff like that. And I don't know when I decided to call myself a feminist. It's, you know, I guess from women's liberation to feminism, it just, yeah, at some point.
Women's liberation movement, and women's movement, and
whatever, but I mean, it was during the early 70s, and after that, I mean, yeah, I've just always considered myself a feminist.
Well, I remember in 1975 sitting goo-goo gaga at the feet of Farron. She was very instrumental in what I considered myself as coming out as a feminist. And, you know, I mean, I was also coming out as a lesbian, but I had been to consciousness raising workshops and training, and so it went on, and I think that I always felt that she was instrumental in my labeling myself as a feminist. And it was definitely also to do with something with releasing from the need of men. You know. That's all.
I don't know what to say or where to begin. I'm just sorry I was late. I would have loved to have heard what everyone else has been saying. It wasn't, feminism wasn't something that's really been on my radar. 1975, I wish I'd have known somebody to help me. I was a single parent, and basically most of my life was just kind of strategizing and managing the system. I really didn't know where to go. And I guess I got lucky in many ways. I have had really beautiful women along the way that's helped me. And when I look back at sort of the angels in my life, they have been women, just kind of helping me in different places. And I guess, fortunately, I got into a business that women really ruled. And so it was never an issue in terms of employment or money. I sold real estate for a long, long time. And real estate really is a woman's business. And I did really well. And so I was never in an environment and I was a single parent, so I didn't really have I didn't give it a lot of thought. And it's just now that this is coming into my awareness, and I think I've always been a feminist without having the label. Like, there's certainly never been any gender issues that I'm aware of. I grew up in a family that was definitely patriarchal. There's no question, and the boys had, you know, more benefits, you know, lesser rules and that type of thing. And but I learned to strategize.
Well, with me, it's always been emotional. I've always been a very naive and unsophisticated person, and so was my mother. And when it came to men, she always told me, you can't do anything about it, you just have to accept it. And she believed that. And I had that internal oppression that Gita was talking about earlier. I feel I've been very oppressed and very naive and very unsophisticated all my life. And so I thought I should follow my mother's example and get married, and my family did. But of course I married the wrong guy. And my marriage was falling apart. I was in court and I was humiliated by a judge here in Nelson. And I burst into tears, and Mary Murray, who was a coordinator of Feminism at the time, she was an advocate that day in the court, and she took me aside and she just felt like she saved my life. She's a great woman, great human being. And I just sort of felt supported by women without intellectualizing it or reading books or anything else. I felt that ever since. And I think that was the defining moment when I was humiliated by a male judge in marriage court.
No, I also grew up in a matriarchal family. The one male was my brother, who was 2.5 years older than I think I was an unknowing feminist from at the latest, the age of 9. Because my brother could go outside and not say where he was going. And if I tried to leave the house, where are you going? Where are you going? When will you be back? And also, he didn't have to do any housework. He did mice, which he would before he threw them in the toilet. This was in New York City. And he would take out the garbage. And for a while, I didn't have to do anything because I was the youngest. But my sister, who was the oldest, had lots of housework to do. My mother wasn't well. And my grandmother was getting older. She was 72 when she died. That was old. And, but I modeled myself negatively against my brother, who didn't have to do anything except garbage and mice. And
then they got a cat and you didn't even have to do that.
And as I grew older, I, of course, was supposed to do the dishes. Well, Louis doesn't have to do the dishes. Why do I have to do the dishes? And that went on for some time, whereas my older sister, of course, was doing the dishes and all this stuff. And I didn't think in terms of sisterliness or, sisterliness. I thought in terms of my brother and me. And so I, as soon as I was able, I began to go out. Earlier, I was always afraid of the dark. And I guess it's just bred into you that by your family, that, there's a boogeyman, he's going to get you. But I was afraid of the dark, but I was out all the time in the dark. I mean, it wasn't dark when I went out, but it was dark by the time I came back in, because, the dark comes very quickly. And I was afraid every moment that I walked in the darkness, but I did it. because whatever I was doing was more important. And one thing my grandmother instilled in me, I think more than the others, was being against wars, because her son had died in the First World War. She got his pension check, and every month when that came, she would cry and curse the capitalists. That was her reaction to this. And I grew up with that, and I internalized it. And so by the time I was 13, I was looking for a socialist youth group, which I couldn't find. But I did go out on in a rally when I was 13, the spring, I think it was, of 1933, was the Oxford Pledge. I don't know if any of you. I refuse to support my government in any war that it may undertake. And it originated in Oxford, you know. It was very popular. There was a lot of antagonism against war after the First World War. And I remember going out in there. When I came back in, we had been warned that we weren't back in our class. By the time the tardy bell rang, it would go on our record. People were afraid of having things. And I came in after that. And there had been people in the class who had gone out, but they were in their seats and they looked at me, who is this girl? And when the teacher asked why we were out, I said I was out at the demonstration. So I guess it went on my record. By the time I was 16, I found this socialist youth group, which I was delighted to join. So then when I after I married, we went to, this was of course in the States, so we'd gone from to Minneapolis. I was working as a librarian and at the university, and I was let go. And I thought, why was I let go? I'm doing very well with the man I'm working for. I'm his assistant. He didn't know. He thought maybe it was because I wasn't getting along with the women in the office. But I knew that wasn't so. I thought it was because my husband was the sponsor of a socialist group, and this was during the McCarthy period. So that's what I wrote to the American Library Association, which was meeting in Minneapolis that year. And I said, this is what's happened to me. I've been fired because my husband was a sponsor of this thing. And when he was approached, he said it had nothing to do with that. That's not why this woman was let go, and that's the way it was. You see, I didn't have tenure. I hadn't been there a year. So I had no recourse. Then I found out later when I had a letter from the FBI asking me for certain information. And I spoke to a lawyer and said, I don't want to do this. And then he began to question me. He said, oh, it had nothing to do with your husband. That's you. It never occurred to me that it was me. No. It was me, okay. So I'd been there. Then we moved to Detroit, and I became, and we had the Vietnam War. My husband was the co-chair of the Detroit Mobilization Against the War, which was a big umbrella group, very big. And I was not going to be known as the wife of this. So I joined a group called Resist, which was there to help the young men, they were all young men, who were resisting the war had either torn off their or had or had refused or had been called but weren't going in. So I separated myself from being the wife of this person. Then we had the women's liberation. Right? First, the women were there, as we have said, with the men, doing whatever, but not in charge of anything. And then they began to realize, this is not what we're all about. And they began the women's liberation movement in Detroit. And I thought, oh, I don't have to wear lipstick anymore. Because my sister had I hated all that stuff. And my sister had inculcated in me that this is what you do. You wear lipstick, not rouge because my cheeks were red and hers were red, but powder and lipstick, right? Very important. Very important. So at that point I gave up my lipstick and my powder. And I did not join any consciousness sessions because consciousness raising, because I felt I didn't need that. But I did feel very much part of not women's liberation, but because by that time I was also doing a lot of reading. And I think this is where I belong, and that's when I became a feminist. Now what I do is work with the Committee Against the Occupation of Palestine. And I feel that it's not labeled feminist, but if you're a feminist, that's one of the things that you might be called upon to do.
Great, thanks.
Thank you.
I have no idea when I became a feminist.
You just call this meeting, you've got to have some idea.
Not an idea. I was fortunate in that I grew up from the time I was born until I was 6 or 7 years old with two grandmothers who were extraordinarily strong women who became my role models in every respect. And I guess that's where I got my feet on the ground and decided that women were rather important people. College, university was not university, it was college for me, was a women's college. And I think that is where I got my real grounding on what it meant to be a woman, and where I felt that women could contribute something to this crazy planet. And there were things that could be done and that women could do them. And we had a small group on campus which was a feminist group. That was not the word we used because this was early 40s, 1938. But that's really what it was. And it was a discussion group on what were women's rights. Did we have any? And so forth.
Sorry, when was this then?
This was, when was this?
Yeah, the year. Like around what year was it?
This was 1938.
When did the women in the States get the vote?
When, in the 20s. Yeah, 20, 23, 24, somewhere in there. Yeah, right. But truthfully, I became a feminist, if you will, through my activities in the peace movement. Because I was one of the founding members of Voice of Women in Vancouver, and that was a very, very strong organization, still is. But the peace part was, to me, more important than the fact that it was a women's organization. Because I felt that these were inseparable things in my mind, truthfully. And I continued on from there. I became a member of American Women for Peace way back when. And I have belonged to organizations. I
have really, if you will, been a feminist in terms of the organizations that I have belonged to. And they're innumerable, and I won't go into all of them. Where it started? When I was born. So, yeah.
Well, it's really wonderful to be here talking this way. I haven't done this sort of thing for a long time, and it's really hard to know where to start. Because maybe I'll start with lipstick, actually. That might be a good place to start. A very controversial issue. I was born in 1942, and I was born to a mother who was a very powerless woman. And she did her best and tried to teach me, and I think that what she taught me was that the only way to get ahead in life was to get a good husband, and a husband that could provide for you. That was, providing. That was very key in my mom, because if you were not wise, you would get a husband that didn't provide for you, so you had to find a husband that would provide for you. And as I grew up in a small town in southern Ontario, I was very aware of class, even though I didn't know what the word was, but I was aware of it. And I knew that my was really marrying up. That was the way to go, marry up. So you married out of your working class origins. And when I found somebody that I could marry who was marrying up, love didn't really enter into it, because, you know, that was not part of the equation. So when the women's liberation movement came along, as did all the other liberation movements, you know, that Bonnie went through, which was a very heady time. You know, I had married for traditional reasons. You know, I wore the makeup and the lipstick, and I tried to do everything. I tried to be a good wife. I was a school teacher at that time. That was a window of opportunity for working class kids to get into university just after the war. That window's closing, as we know. So I married up, not for love, I married up. And the women's liberation movement came along, and I was involved with daycare, because when you have children and you have a career, you have to have daycare. So really daycare was the place I started to become politicized. And I was involved with the NDP. I thought I was some sort of a socialist. So my feminism and my politics have always been really important to me, and I would say more political than feminist at this point. But anyway, I remember looking at Life magazine, and my father pointed out to me, "Look at this woman." You know, in Life magazine, she was from California. She gave up everything. She gave up her wife, her husband, her family. Look at this. And of course, I guess I must have been discontented, and he knew it. He said, "Would you do this?" I said, "I sure would." And I did. And I think, you know, working with women in daycare, working with women, I think that's what really got me started on life. And I have never been able to give up lipstick. I don't know, I think it was Rita Hayworth. I just, you know, nostalgia about your childhood and the 40s is really amazing. And as we get older and you look back on that, I mean, those beautiful women were just still in my mind, I guess. But I haven't been involved with women too much in this part of my life. I have been very political, and I do find I am upset with the world as it is. I know that I'm diverging from what I should be talking about, but I've often thought about these women in Iceland who decided that they would give 4 years of their life to politics, because I know that I don't want to become a professional politician. We don't want that kind of politics, but I often wonder about that, you know, if we couldn't just get together and say, you know, we could make this commitment, and what kind of a change women could make politically. So I guess that's me.
Phew. Mommy,
good question, eh?
Excellent question.
I've raised a couple of questions, having listened to all of this. How many of you have been associated with a women's movement, a liberation movement, where there have been lots of women involved? Most of you?
Mm-hmm.
No. No? Right.
How,
Well, yeah.
what do you mean by involved?
Yeah.
Where you have been
what
working
extent?
for women's rights, women's lib, and where you are working with a large group of women. Okay. Yes? Right. How many?
Does working it for Wicklow count?
Okay. All right.
I'm wondering about the word large,
Yeah.
because in the 70s I was working on a women's newspaper called Herself, and there was probably 20 of us who cycled through. But there was probably 150 women who showed up at meetings and who went to all the various groups and all the dances, and twice that who showed up at rallies. But all the women seemed to divide into small groups. I mean, we were doing layout at the time.
Well, what I'm talking about
so
is where you have a cause, if you will. Where you're trying to get child care, where you're trying to diminish violence against women, where there is a large group of people and trying to do some of these things.
In organized women's.
Yes, that's right, an organized group.
Directed.
Yeah, because really in this country there have been sort of three central kinds of feminist movements. And there were the things that happened prior to the 60s, from the 60s to the 90s, and today what is happening. And what I'm reading these days is that the number of women who are participating in the larger groups of women has gone right down. That it's mostly with smaller groups of women coming together. And what I'm interested in is how do women now see, by coming together in smaller groups, how they're going to achieve the liberation things that have to happen. How are
Real
we
social
going
change.
Keep the
Yes.
momentum up.
Yeah, because it seems to me, and maybe I'm wrong, but the strength is in the numbers that you have of people who are part of that common cause. And yet, in talking with younger women, what I'm hearing is that they don't want to be part of the mass movement, if you will, but want to achieve these through smaller groups. Is that true? I'm looking at younger women. And
That's under the room. That's there. And,
so, is that the way you feel about it?
Strength in numbers.
Yeah. In other words, is a large grouping of women something that you want to avoid?
Most of the time, actually.
I'm glad you came.
Anyway.
Well, I guess maybe that's why I started coming to the Women's Center, is just to be around some sort of movement. I started sewing for the Bag Project, because I thought that would be something empowering to do. And I think that the more women that come in and sew, like, the bigger the group gets. We all kind of support one another, and I think that says a lot. I think it's gotten bigger, even though maybe not as people will show up, just because it's been here for long enough. And I try to tell as many people about it as I can, but I think it's hard sometimes to get people to care.
I think that I'd like to address this question, because what I see is, you know, there was kind of like a wounded generation. You know, I think that when I look at the older generations, you know, you guys had like that cause, like it was that fight to be equal, and you know, I mean, you really had to work hard to get like way down here, up to here, right? And in my generation, it didn't feel as difficult. Like, I think, you know, even Julie, you said, you know, like, you just sort of structured yourself. I mean, you just sort of fit in, you know, and I think there's like coming from the oppressive umbrella is this sort of woundedness, so we kind of became this me generation of like needing to heal ourselves, needing to go within, and sort of this whole me, right? There's a lot of just about me, right? And I think we're coming out of that now in terms of going, okay, we've come to a place where we're recognizing that we do not have equality. And so I think it is actually, there's a new movement afoot for that. And what I vision here for Wicwa is, you know, it's been a very roller coaster ride, as many of you women understand. And I think now, I mean, I just feel sort of a surge of new energy in terms of gathering numbers and gathering funds and gathering movement, and I think that our strength is back, and I think that there's enough of us now that have kind of gone through that process and learned from our elders to be able to do that. But I don't think that we realize, and of course I'm doing blanket statements here, but we realize the significance of what had come before us and the importance of how it needs to be carried forward. So, you know, that's what I'm sensing in terms of the women that I communicate with all the time, which is a large number of women, being the coordinator here. So I think it's going to just speed up really, really quickly. And with technology and just with this new sense of empowerment for women, you know, I feel that it's a surge of like a sort of the next phase, or however you want to word it, of feminism. So it's certainly my vision to be able to hold Wicwa accountable for that, and to be able to
see the development then of
absolutely
of the larger group.
You know, I just see abundance coming in, and I see support coming in, and I see a large percentage of women like holding pieces of that to come back together, because I think we've been separated and segregated for so long that, you know, we can't do it alone, and I think we thought we could for a while, you know. So that's sort of,
well, this is my hope.
Yeah, this is the sense that I feel from whom
happening.
I'm communicating with in my work, and you know, so.
If I could just ask a little bit, Betty, I know you're saddened by the voice of women losing prestige or losing a place in Canadian society.
Well, in BC it has. It hasn't nationally.
Okay.
And it's still part of the UN Advisory Committee and so forth. Yeah.
So what I'm wondering is, are you thinking that when women come together in larger groups, that's the empowering thing that gives structure to women's political progress?
Yeah,
and
well,
if women don't have that, then how
do you achieve it?
Yeah, yeah. That, I think that's a really good question,
okay.
because I mean, I don't understand the contemporary technology that is so good or so bad or whatever.
I think,
but you hear that it's really effective. You know, that Obama was able to do all of this work because young people were on the internet. Well, I mean, is that really the thing that's going to?
Well, I think it's just bringing more awareness. Right. Say when I was 20, I didn't realize that all the stuff was happening on the other side of the world because I didn't have the knowledge. And now my daughter, who's 19, she has that knowledge, or my daughter, who's 14, has that awareness. I mean, she's very much involved with global peace and global issues and wanting to start from the core and going, okay, I need to do this. And I'm aware that there are issues out there, whereas we didn't realize in my generation that there necessarily was, whereas in your generation you had to do it because, you know, you were kind of, okay, it's us or nothing, right? So I think that's the difference in terms of technology. You know, just networks of, you know, peace networks online and those kind of things. And I think that's where the numbers are growing, that it doesn't have to stay, you know, so local. It can be more global in that way. So in the terms of bigger groups. But
another thing with technology too is that music is a lot easy to access. And there's lots of women's festivals like Lilith Fair with lots of different women musicians, singer-songwriters that perform to mass groups of people, and all that stuff is out there. And it's so easy to get. Like, you know, it might have been harder for a woman musician to get heard by so many people before, and now it's televised.
One of the things I observe is, because I'm a singer, and so whenever I hear somebody sing, I can't help but sort of either try to sing along, or sometimes I'll hear something, I'll go, why does that feel not right to me? And when I try to sing like that person, I learn why it's not right. And I'm a little horrified by how many young women singers seem really high and a little girlish. And I go, what's that about? So I'm really curious for those of you who are a different generation. I mean, there was a kind of female folk singing that happened, like Joni Mitchell was an alto and she made herself sing up there, because that's true for my generation too. But there's a sort of a phenomenon, there's all these empowered young women feeling really great to get out there, but I hear the voices and I don't hear them being in their strength to my ear as a singer. So is that my bias? Like what's... So, you know, I hear that, but so it's kind of the epitome for me of there's so much information out there on the internet, but there's so much information we can't access it because it's too much. So there might be tons of women singers, but what are they singing? What are they expressing? So I'm looking to you two because you're the youngest in the room and you're right in my eyeballs. But I'm not picking on you.
The only thing I can say to that is that I'm actually a drummer, and often I'm asked, "So are you the singer?"
And that's so you're
and I'm
drummer.
like,
Yes.
I'm actually setting up my drum.
Yes, yes. So
No.
that's the fascinating thing, isn't it? Right, that it's still that women are the singers, right? When we're seen in a certain role. So I'm so excited to hear, Beth, that you experience something is shifting. Because sometimes it can look for me like, wow. It's it's hard to see
Well,
it.
it's different.
It's hard to
Pop
see it.
music is obviously going backwards.
Excuse me, but there's like this elephant sitting in the middle of this room.
Which is?
You two. Everybody gets to watch as a 16-year-old girl is gang raped. And it's posted on YouTube.
Oh,
And they're watching, and somebody's taking the goddamn picture so they can put it on YouTube.
Oh, that one, yeah.
We're going really, but technology is really terrific. All the pornography any person can ever see. No restrictions, no public information about it. Women have been fighting against pornography and the degradation of women in public. This is private, and it's everywhere. It's ubiquitous. And this is just another little bit of pornography. And if the technology is good for us, right now I just cannot see anything
I'm
good.
with you. I'm with you on that one. Absolutely.
Bonnie, I think what technology has done is it's two things. It has done the opening up, and it has also opened up access to that side of life. So it's like we're in the balance now where we have to make the decision as a species. Do you know what I mean? Like we have access to too much pornography, which is insightful. Plus we have access to all the knowledge of the world.
Yeah.
It's
all
all
in how you
the
use
cultures
it.
of the world, everything. So I know, but it's a balance. I mean, I've looked at this too because I know exactly what you're saying, and that. So we as a species now have to decide.
But if there were,
you know,
it's not that we're talking about feminism. It's not we as a species have to decide. If I see something like that, I'm saying that women are, that we've lost.
We're more vulnerable through that process.
So
because
how
it's
do we
more
come
worldwide.
together to put some controls on things like this?
Well, we don't
as
control
women.
that.
But
No, but
how do we get control?
Well, legally they're
How
trying
do
to
we get more control than we
it.
have at the present time? Because there it is. That's where the decisions are being made completely without our input. I mean, we have.
I think.
I don't know.
I mean, look at the political situation. How many women have we got out there making decisions, political decisions?
Not very many.
Not very many. And so we need to come together, it seems to me.
Finding solutions.
I really want to respond to that, Betty. I too am completely horrified by that event and what it says about the young people in the society who participated in the propagation of it, the action of doing it, and then the propagation of it. And I think, there's some kind of lost soul here. Yeah. Really. And I think that what's missing are the clear voices of the elders who need to come out very, very, very publicly and write those ideas and those feelings to the letters to the editor, to, you know, get them read in public in various ways and venues, that we need to speak the truth about the meaning of that in this society. And it's only when we all stand up and use our voices together that we can make that kind of change. I don't think we're going to get control of the internet. We're just not, you know.
We might get some restrictions.
But we can use the internet.
We can use the internet to get this idea across. At one of the coordinating collective meetings, Lisa, the woman who left, had brought up the knowledge that she had heard from her teenage daughter that there was a video game that was going around, that in the video game women were being raped, and this was part of the video game.
Yes,
so
that's right.
one of the things that CC decided to do, and Sandra will be taking that off, that's one of the issues she, I think in conjunction with Marcia, are
I'm
going
not sure if that game is available in Canada or not.
But that still is an issue that the CHIG decided that they felt strongly about, that they want to address the issue. I think that as many people as possible start addressing that issue. There's probably a lot of young people in particular who are on Facebook all the time. You know, and if any of these ideas, or if women can decide this is something that they care about and want to protest about, they can use that same medium as a way to get this idea out that this is not acceptable, this is not okay, and that's a very sick act by some very lost people. I think that the videos that people watch, which are intensely violent, these kids do get the same way that when they go through the military training, they get distanced from anything having to do with the fact that they're killing a human being. So I think that these violent games are doing the same thing. So it's a matter of the teachers. It's a matter of like getting, because Shannon's on the union right there. She's someone who could like do outreach in that area. You're on the radio. You can do outreach on that area. You can talk about it. You can get it out. People can write. People can use the YouTube. Any issue, the place that same damage is done, we can also use that. And the people who are very savvy can use that to get that idea across. You know, it's like...
Yeah, and there's so much, like there's so many positive things. There's like there's the 13 grandmothers, there's all that information about them online. You know, there's tons of interaction with that. There's so many positive things, the Shift Network, there's like I could go on and on and on and on about all the different amazingly positive things that are out there as well. So if we can focus on those things and be solution based around that, you know, with bringing awareness to the other things that are happening. I'm not saying there, you know, there's two sides obviously, but if we can take that technology like Kathleen is saying and use that to our benefit to get the word out and raise the awareness in a positive way, I mean, I think that's where the solution base has to come from.
It is two. Two.
So one thing that I heard, if it's helpful or not, is that anyone who goes near that site at all is under scrutiny for child pornography, for downloading child pornography. So if you're like, you want to take a peek just for whatever reasons, they'll have you blip for child pornography.
How are they going to handle it?
However they deal with pornography, child pornography.
And if you go on that site,
they'll watch it. It'll be monitored.
They can track you.
They can track you. So just to let. I don't know.
So it's things that are aired online. So when something happens, then somebody will take the video. Like say for example, this video could be put online on a site called YouTube, and then anyone in the world can access this video.
Yes, has access to it.
And when is the
So
next
can I just say
finish your question? Doris has a question.
And we also were losing track of the hands up on the 1, 2, so just to slow down.
Question, Doris, I just want to change the film.
What were you going to say?
Give me a second.
Well, I was just going to say, as important it is to use like the technology that we have, I think it is also just as important to keep craft alive. And Nelson is a really strong place in that respect where
what's that?
What was the
craft?
Craft. That, you know, that people are still involved in theater, people are still involved with typewriters, people are still involved with things that aren't technical.
Right.
And that
Absolutely.
we can still reach people through art, and and we're really lucky in Nelson that we have a lot of artists, and I think that artists also have a really good habit of getting together to work on things. Like there's the Threads Guild in the Valley that my mom's been involved with for lots of years. Like,
who's your mom?
I was just going to say that. Where's your mom?
Phyllis.
Phyllis. Oh.
Phyllis,
We know
take
Phyllis.
him.
Yeah.
And you can teach one another your craft as well. And I think that that is empowering, and that can be a movement as well. And if you go to any protest, people have big puppets, people have banners. Like, as I think it's important to keep that alive as well as the technology. And I think that people my age especially are getting really separated from the earth. They're getting separated from gardening. I think that it's really important to pass on that knowledge as well. And like using the internet is a good way of doing it, but I think that it's really important to just be hands-on and to just keep passing that on. And that when women get together to garden or do anything, I think that it makes us all stronger.
To stay connected without technology.